police officer in New Zealand to an online fitness coach.
I got to a point where I don't really care. Surrounded by negative environment, like you need to get out of this shift work. Even while I was at work, I was already thinking about training. My mind was always in that space.
All right, welcome to another episode of Raw Relentless. I have Lisa on with me. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Bo.
So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're up to.
Awesome. So yeah, my name is Lisa Franz. I am a nutrition coach and a digital nomad. I traveled the globe while trying to help other people lose body fat, gain muscle mass, improve their body composition and their relationship with food, because I myself have struggled with all of the above in the past. And so once I learned how to navigate that properly and live a fun life while having a body that I love, I just wanted to make that my mission to teach that to other people as well.
Digital nomad, huh? So that is a lot of people's dream. How were you able to achieve that?
Well, so I'm originally from Germany. I left Germany in 2009, though. I did a trip around the world after I finished high school and met my ex-husband in New Zealand, and moved to New Zealand for about 10 years. And then at some point, I decided I felt really like tied down and I just wanted to explore more. And in 2019, left New Zealand and left that relationship and my job in the police at the time. And yeah, really knew I wanted to work location free. At first, I had no idea what I wanted to do exactly, because I had studied exercise science and nutrition, but I was like, how do I bring that online? Like in 2018, 17, that it wasn't really as popular as it is right now to be an online coach, or as common anyway. But yeah, I learned that it's absolutely possible to do so. And I initially worked for another company, which really helped me also see how systems are run online, how to acquire, clients online and so on. And since 2021, I started my own company, Nutrition Coaching and Life, and have been happy with global clients, Philippines, Australia, the US, Canada, Europe, ever since.
That's awesome. And you're originally from Germany?
Yes, I'm originally from Germany. After that, I lived in New Zealand for those 9 years that I mentioned. I lived in the States only for 1 year when I was in high school, actually 2006 to 2007. And aside from that, mostly Southeast Asia, and for the last few years, more the Latin American countries, because it does work really well with the US time zone, and the majority of my clients and the people that I podcast with are in the US.
Your English is phenomenal. Like I could barely hear any type of German accent, really.
Well, thank you. That means a lot.
So as you've traveled, like I want to get to your fitness stuff, but I'm fascinated by the travel side too. As you've traveled, what are some of your favorite places that you've stayed? And usually how long do you stay when you are traveling?
Right. And so I've been to by now I'm up to country 54. I have been to a few countries. I would say that my favorites so far have definitely been Indonesia, so Bali more than anything, Thailand. I really, really loved Mexico as well, Colombia. Now I am in Bolivia, which I'm also thoroughly enjoying. I think it always depends on like what for, because I also like Greece or the Greek islands, etc. But I wouldn't want to be there for longer than just a few weeks. So to your question of like how long do I stay in places for? In the early years of my digital nomading, it was more like 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 weeks. But as you can imagine, that does get a bit tiring after a while. So I then kind of moved into like 3 months,
Mm,
4 months, 3 months, and then that transitioned to 7 months. And now I enjoy having a base. And so at the moment, Bolivia is my base, and I have a 3-year visa here. But from here, I try to like explore
mm.
other South American countries or go on various trips that way. But yeah, it does get tiring, like always packing up your stuff. And I mean, I'm a very minimalistic person anyway, so I don't own a lot, but nonetheless, even dragging 1.5 suitcases around with me and packing everything up every single time is exhausting.
So, what about it? What about the Greek area, Greek Isles that you could only stay there a few weeks and not an extended time?
I think like Europe in general, I mean it's lovely because you can like it's so easy to move
Mhm,
around. And I was in Mallorca for about half a year. I really didn't enjoy that. But like generally speaking, I think South America or even the Southeast Asian countries, it is just a little bit slower
mm,
still. Whereas even on the Greek islands, like it's starting to pick up from that European
mm,
vibe and starting to be more about like making the money and more the productivity
mhm,
side of things. And aside from that, like even just from a pure structural thing, those countries like here or Mexico or Thailand are a little bit more laid out for digital nomads. Like it's really easy to work from cafes. No one is gonna look at you in a
mm.
weird way, or it's more common to rent an Airbnb for half a year or a year. You don't need to fill in a long contract or anything like that. So it's really kind of more designed for that sort of
So being
living.
a nomad like this, is it hard to meet people and build relationships? Because, if you're changing places every several months, you can't really, build a strong relationship with friends or significant others. How does that work out for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to meet people for sure, especially if there are other digital nomads. But as you mentioned, like most of that is more digital, is more superficial. You'll exchange more like, oh, so what do you do, or where are you from, and like that kind of small talk, which is nice to an
Mhm,
extent as well. But precisely because of that, I have been craving more of a stability and more of a base to actually form friendships, potential relationships in that sort of way. Because, yeah, of course, working online, it can also get a little bit
mhm.
lonely, or you just don't have those deeper connections. So, very good question.
Now, how long did you stay in Colombia for? Because I know, man, I've talked to so many people that, like you, have either moved or do the extended stays in South America because it's just such a beautiful country. But I know a lot of people that go to Colombia specifically. How long were you there for?
So all in all, about two and a
Oh,
half
wow.
years, and I was actually intending to get a longer visa or a more of a permanent visa, but I had issues with my visa in the end, and they or basically negated it 3 times, and so I was like, it's not meant to be. I'm supposed to move on, and in the end, it worked out really well. Even though at first, of course, I was like, oh shoot, I need to leave the country within 10 days. That's not
Mm,
ideal, but yeah, everything happens for a reason, in my
yeah,
opinion.
and I assume that since you were there for that length of time, that you felt safe, like crime, because I do hear that too in Colombia that there is pretty
Hmm.
decent amount of crime in certain places, which I guess you're gonna have that anywhere, but, I think that's kind of the perception.
Exactly. No, you're totally right. Everybody basically asks me that, but I have to say, well, number one, I'm not much of a night person. I'm much more like I'd rather get up at 4:30 in the morning than go to bed at 4:30 in the morning. So, I'm usually in bed by like 8:30
Mhm,
or 9, which I think even just living that sort of lifestyle, you evade a lot of potential crime or potential just yeah mishappenings, I guess. I don't drink alcohol. I always make sure that I don't walk outside when it's dark on my own, even if it's just a few blocks. So, I travel reasonably smart, I hope anyway. Don't wear big jewelry that is just like people inviting people to steal from you, so to speak. But of course, something can always happen anywhere, no matter where you go. So far, I have not had anything negative happen to me whatsoever. And on the contrary, I've always found people to be super helpful, super forthcoming, super just interested in And I always think that, like, globally speaking, we all have so much more in common
Mhm.
than what differentiates us. And it's actually wonderful to see how open and lovely people really
Yeah,
are.
that's so true. So do you already have your next spot picked out after Bolivia?
Well, I do want to keep that as a base, but actually next week I'm traveling back to Europe to visit my family, and within that trip I'm also going to Scotland, which I
Mm.
haven't been to, and I'm going to go to Montenegro, which is like a smaller country south of
Mhm.
Croatia. Haven't been there either, so a little bit of exploring coming up over the next couple of
Scotland is
months.
beautiful. I was fortunate enough to actually travel, through Scotland. Me and my friends rented a car, and we started in England and drove all the way through.
Oh,
Yeah, it was awesome
amazing.
because we got to see so much of Scotland and got to pick out certain spots and stay in castles and all of that stuff. So, yeah,
Oh,
it was
wow.
very cool.
Yeah, I look forward
Yeah,
to that. Even though it's such a short
it is.
distance from Germany, I never made it there. I've been to London several times and Ireland a couple of times, but yeah, Scotland somehow was never. I'm much more of a warm
Yeah,
weather person. So I guess that's part of the reason why I wasn't drawn there too much, but there's so much history, and yeah, hopefully in July the weather will hold
yeah,
up
for
for me.
sure. Yeah, and then you're right next to, Ireland, well, Wales and Ireland too, so, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This time, I don't think I will make it on my trip over there this time, but yeah, I'm excited to see like Edinburgh and, as you mentioned, all the castles and just the wonderful landscapes as
Yeah.
well.
So, you were a police officer in New Zealand, and then you make a pretty drastic switch to be from an officer to an online fitness coach. How did that transition happen?
Well, I've always been interested in physiology and anatomy and exercise science and yeah, nutrition because of personal struggles as well. So right out of high school, I did study exercise science and nutrition or got my bachelor's there, but I didn't really know like what to do with it. I knew I didn't want to be a personal trainer. I just felt like I was lacking life experience and I wanted something more stable, so to speak. And so that's why I actually applied for the police without even thinking that I would get in. And it was just sort of more of a fun experience rather than thinking, oh, this is my childhood dream. You know, some people they see themselves as a firefighter or a police
Mhm,
officer ever since they could think, but that was never the case
mhm.
for me. And I did really enjoy my first few years within the police in the sense of just learning a lot about humanity, learning a lot about myself, and the camaraderie that you have there. And it does feel sort of purposeful as well. But after a while, what got to me was number one, the shift work. It was just like so hard on
Yeah.
my body, so hard on me mentally. Like I'm a very, very happy, optimistic person, but I got to a point where I was just like, oh, if I die, I don't really care. I don't really see the point of getting up. And that was purely because on average, I was sleeping like 4 to 5
Mm.
hours per day because we had such a horrible roster. And so that was a big, big part. And then, of course, you're surrounded by more of a negative environment. No one's going to say to you, oh, thank you for arresting me. Thank you for giving me this parking
Right,
ticket
right.
or whatever it might be, right? So that also got to me. And then thirdly, even while I was at work, I was already thinking about training. I was already helping people with their training programs. I was trying to help people or educate myself more through in terms of nutrition and everything else. So my mind was always in that space. I just didn't really know how that could fit into my life. And then eventually, when my body cues were just so high of like you need to get out of this shift work, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do everything to build up my side business or a nutrition coaching and sort of status along the side so that when I leave the police, I feel like I already have at least a leg to stand on, and then I can kind of move from there and build on that. And that's exactly what I did.
So you started that roughly, 2019, correct?
So 2019, I went full
Mm.
time nutrition coaching, and I stopped with the police. 2018 is when I started with nutrition coaching on the side. Like about a half a year, I kind of built it up until I left for good.
So, what do you think in the last, because you're 7 years in now, what do you think is what opinion has changed from year one to where you're at now with nutrition and then exercise after working with so many clients?
Well, in terms of nutrition, I think the main principles that I knew from that beginning onwards have never really changed. I think what changed more for me is becoming even more empathetic and like understanding that just because something works for me doesn't necessarily mean it works for the next person. So for instance, I love carbs and I could care less about fatty foods like fries. I don't really care about, but give me like fruit and potatoes and whatever, and just because I have that personal preference doesn't mean that the next person has a personal preference. Nonetheless, the overarching principles of like calories in, calories out, and the importance of protein, the importance of fiber, etc., I do think they all apply for the same
Hmm.
person, and I've thought that from the beginning on. But yeah, just kind of like the ability and even just the desire to put myself more and more into the other person's
Hmm.
shoes have certainly grown and becoming learning more about the different cultures as well. Because as I mentioned, clients from the Philippines are going to have a different preference when it comes to food than someone who lives in Colombia or someone who lives in Germany. So even just acknowledging what they have available, that maybe a person in Germany is going to want to certainly incorporate quite a bit of bread into their diet,
Hmm.
whereas the person in the Philippines certainly wants to have rice in their diets, like something like that. Has definitely like I've learned a lot about that. I think outside of that, also just acknowledging that there are differences between men and women in regards to training, but also in regards to nutrition. So, for instance, when it comes to like intermittent fasting, it works on average really well for most
Hmm.
men that I have worked with, only for very few women I have worked with. And so, like, there is more, I think, in terms of hormones, I have learned a lot and how that does affect people and how you can even though again calories in calories out is the overarching theme, but yes, something like weight loss becomes harder as you go through the menopause transition, or weight loss is harder if you're super stressed, or weight loss is harder if you have a work deadline and you're really preoccupied because you're also going through a divorce. Like all these kind of things are I've just become a lot more aware of how important that is, and just saying try harder or you overate is not very helpful as a
Yeah.
coach. Sometimes you need to give some actual, like practical, applicable action steps for people to go through.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that because when I've worked with people and they fall off or whatever, sometimes it can be very hard to be empathetic because I'm such a disciplined person. Granted, like, there are days, you are going to have your days where it's hard to, eat clean or stay within your macros, but overall, I would say 95% of the time I'm very disciplined with my food. And so when someone is not that way, you're like, what's your problem? Like, really, this is not that hard.
Exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Yes, I think if it's what you live and breathe and what
Yeah.
you enjoy doing as well, and you just love seeing how that affects your
Mhm.
training, how you sleep, and so on. But yeah, most people unfortunately don't
Yeah.
think that way
Yeah, and
necessarily.
that's the thing is it's like you just wish that they could see if you just stick with this for, a few weeks and you start seeing the changes, you'll never wanna go
Mhm.
back to that other way because you actually see the changes, and I think that's what it is for me is I see the changes, if my body is stressed, I do hold on to more water, right? Um,
Yes.
if I'm much cleaner with my when I say much, like, maybe I'm not having a candy bar at night after dinner or something like that. I see the differences when I cut those things out. My calories
Mhm.
might be the exact same, yes, but I think there are some little nuances between what you're actually ingesting in your body, right? Although I will
Absolutely.
argue
Yeah.
that fries is a potato, so
That is a good point. It still is certainly a lot of
yeah.
carbs there. But no, you're so right. And I think the reason why it is really easy for us as well to live that way is because it's part of our
Mhm.
identity, right? Like you even before we started recording, you're like, I'm also a fitness professional. This is who you are. You're an active person. You eat well. That's probably how you identify. Whereas most people that I at least start working with, it's like I have my life and I want to work nutrition
Mhm.
around that and live my best life that way. But it's just, a ways to or a means to the end, so to speak. So actually, one of the biggest things that we do work on is that, of course, aside from those guidelines that I was giving in terms of calories, etc., is like how do we change identity? How do
Mhm.
we change habits? How do we so that it actually sticks and you're becoming the person and identifying with that person, like what would a fit person do? What would that fit person choose? How would they even live on when they're on
Mhm.
vacation or when they have a work trip or something like that? So I think that's really, really important. And I certainly didn't have those skills as a coach early on. I do think, to the second part of your question, when it comes to training, what opinion I have changed since then. So, to give you a little bit of context, even before I was starting to work as a nutrition coach, I was mostly doing
Mm.
CrossFit. That was like the high area of CrossFit for
Yep.
several years, and even like competing as a police officer in CrossFit, etc. And like I was living and breathing
Yeah.
the whole thing. And of course, as so many people, I got injured and I had like neck injury, wrist injury, etc. And so I was basically forced to slow
Mhm.
down. And I'm so thankful that that happened because it also forced me to actually learn more about what this sort of high intensity, high load training does to my body and how it might not be sustainable for me at that phase of life, especially with low amounts of
Mm.
sleep, and other stressors going on. I always say I think CrossFit is more of a performance sport, and unfortunately, many people, and I myself included, want to use it as a sport to get to a certain aesthetic
Mhm.
level, and that's just not the case. Like if you're living a very stressful life, I would argue that for very few people, actually, CrossFit is the sport. And so, yeah, I transitioned into more of like a powerlifting, just sort of strength focused sport. And over the last few years, probably since 2021, 2022, a little bit more into like bodybuilding style
Mhm.
training. I've never competed, nor do I currently have any aspirations. But yeah, so I've certainly, while I initially was kind of laughing at machines, was laughing at the quote unquote gym bros. I now am one of them, and I can truly see the value of both of functional training. I think for many
Mhm.
people, especially if you only have 2 to 3 training sessions per week, training functionally is really a great approach to just stay active and fit in your day to day life. But I also think that the more advanced you get, and if you have determined imbalances in your physique and your abilities, um, machines can be so helpful to just specifically target something. To give you a concrete example, I had a sciatic nerve issue a few years ago also, and I found out that it is because I've never learned how to properly switch on my
Mhm.
glutes. So I was like all the squatting, all the deadlifting, even if it was, 240, 250 pounds or whatever, I was doing that with my back and my hamstrings. I didn't
Mhm.
use my glute
Mhm.
at all. And so that's where the issues arose. And now, when I can address that specific deficiency in me with, abduction machines or kickback machines or so, without taxing my central nervous system quite as much as you would with a deadlift or with a squat, it's super beneficial. So I think on the training aspect, I have certainly changed my mind a lot.
I couldn't agree more. I've found the same thing, especially as I've gotten older. I train more now to be able to recover enough for the next workout. I don't try
That's
and kill
it.
myself anymore. I get a nice pump, but I do just enough that I know I'm gonna be able to, recover for my next workout whenever that is, the following day or 2 days from now or whatever that is. Especially since, it's much harder to recover now the older you get. So it's not like when I was in my 20s and early 30s where, you could trash your body and, do a killer leg day and then feel good enough to do a killer back day, a day or two later. Now that's just not the case.
Yeah, and I think especially if you also have other focuses, like you have your business, you
Right.
might have a
Right.
family, or that that's it's different than when you're in your 20s and that might be all that
Yep.
you're really thinking about all day
Yeah.
training.
No, 100%. I mean, and that's why a lot of the guys that are the greats in those industries, you know, the Arnolds, the Lou Ferrignos, the Ronnie Colemans, that's all they did. That's all they focused on. There was
Hmm.
nothing else. Even the CrossFit people, right? At the time,
Yes,
oh,
yes.
what's his name? Rich Froning, who was super popular. That's
Hmm.
all he did, you know?
Hmm.
He doesn't have the life
Hmm.
that he has now
Absolutely.
with kids and, you know, family, and he's got his own
Right.
business. So, yeah, all of those variables make a huge difference, which even the clients that come into the gym here, we adapt the workouts to their lifestyle, right? I yeah,
Mm, I love it.
I tell my trainers all the time, like, don't kill your clients, right? You want them coming back.
Mm.
If they wake up the next day where they feel like they can't walk, that's a bad thing, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally had that mentality of like, oh, I didn't get a huge
Yeah,
sweat on. I wasn't like laying on the floor, um, gasping for air at the end of my workout. This wasn't a
yeah.
good workout, so to speak, or I'm not sore. This wasn't a good workout. And now I'm like, that indicates absolutely nothing in terms of
Mhm,
hypertrophy or even strength gain. So, not even in terms of calorie burn. And then if people nowadays like chase certain
mhm,
numbers on their activity
mhm.
trackers, like, oh, look, I burned 1,000 calories. Well,
Or
these trackers are so
yep,
inaccurate
yes, they
anyway.
are.
And in the long run, we're so much better off like focusing on muscle
Mhm.
growth and like keeping our hormones in check rather than just chasing those numbers on an
Yeah,
activity
I couldn't agree
tracker.
more, and that's another thing that I tell a lot of people is, just move. That's the biggest thing is just move, especially
Hmm.
Americans, they sit so much, you know, at a desk, they're barely moving. You know, I'm a big, big advocate of walking, just walk. If you could walk with a
Hmm.
weighted vest, that would be great because it's a little resistance, but it's not enough where it's gonna fatigue you. But you would be surprised if you go out and you do 10, 12, 15,000 steps a day walking, general walking, and then maybe add in a vest in there at night after dinner, after you eat, how much that will affect not only weight loss,
Oh, yes,
body composition, and overall recovery because we are meant to move. And the less you move, you know, the
absolutely.
worse off you are.
It honestly has so many positive effects in the sense of blood sugar
Mhm.
regulations and hormones as well. And if you ask me, like, what are the biggest differences in terms of lifestyle or even food between those various countries I have been to, I would say the activity factor is certainly something that sets the US apart from most other nations. I mean, granted, even in other countries in Europe or so, it's changing. It's unfortunately becoming a little bit less
Mhm.
activity as well. But on average, if I look at my grandma or my mom or so, like this is a true story. Last year when I was home, I was just curious, like how many steps my mom would get without even trying, because she's not someone to like. Unfortunately, she's not someone who exercises for the exercise sake, but she's very active. Like she gardens, she takes her bicycle to go
Mm,
to work. Even most of the groceries she'll do
that's
with the
awesome.
bicycle or walking. And so I gave her my Apple Watch, and I just wanted to see what she gets on average. And honestly, on average, she had something between 12,000 and 15,000
Wow.
steps
Wow.
per day without trying, like literally not without saying, oh, I'm going to go
Mhm.
for a walk. We don't have
Mhm.
a dog
Mhm.
or nothing like that, but this is just walking up and down in a house with a staircase, doing day-to-day tasks. And that's also something that they show in certain when they look at the blue zones. I'm not sure
Yep.
if you're familiar with them, but that's kind of for the listeners. The blue zones are sort of zones all over the globe where they've identified people live on average the longest. They usually or often get above 100 years. And so they were curious, what do these zones have in common? And of course, aside from certain things like eating vegetables and so on, they also had in common that they were just
Mhm.
active, not necessarily like, oh, they all bodybuild or all they were all doing high intensity training. No, not
Mhm.
at all. Just like in their day to day life. And I think that's certainly something that unfortunately is it's made hard very hard for people in the US because I travel to the US a couple of times a year. One of my best friends, she lives there, and when I visited her last time, I went to the gym and I wanted to go to Starbucks right afterwards to meet her. And the Starbucks was on the other side of the street. And I couldn't cross the road because it was a
Yeah.
highway. So like I looked in Google Maps, how do I get there? And it was showing me like a 30-minute walk, how to get to Starbucks. I could literally see on the other side. I was like, this is insane. Why is
Right.
there no
Right.
crosswalk anywhere nearby, get alone a sidewalk or a side path? Like it's why do they make it so hard? And that yeah, it's quite sad to see that
Yeah, that is one
unfortunately.
thing about Europe is, the way that they set up their cities. It's very, very accessible, to walk, to places. Even public transportation is way
Hmm.
better in Europe than it is in
Yeah.
America. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. The other thing that I thought was interesting when I looked at those blue zones was that they all these zones showed that they had strong social connection and sort of a strong
Mhm.
purpose. So kind of going back to your question of like, is it easy to build relationships if you travel? And I have to admit that over the course of the years, I've kind of like learned that I need to actually put an
Mhm.
effort into meeting people and making those connections because like, naturally I'm quite happy just doing my
Mhm.
own thing. I like my alone
Mhm.
time. I wouldn't say like I'm a loner, but I'm by nature a bit more
Mhm.
introverted and I enjoy alone time. So now I've kind of made it more of an effort of like maybe not using my headphones every day when I go to the cafe or saying hello to at least one person at
Mhm.
the gym that I recognize from the day prior or so. And that's not something that comes natural to me, but yeah, I think it's very important to foster some sort of connections. Of course, ideally, even more deeper connections, because the research is very, very clear when it comes to not just longevity, but also mental health as we age and so on. That has a huge
Yeah,
effect.
100%. Is there commercialized gyms in, Bolivia?
Yeah, actually, there's a great gym close by, which is from a chain which is called
Mm.
UFC. So actually, kind of more like fighting oriented, but it has a ton of amazing equipment
Mhm.
as well. So I'm very fortunate to have that
That's
close
cool.
by.
The other thing I wanted to ask you too is I find it fascinating that you have so many clients all over the world. You know, a lot of the online fitness coaches here in the States, their clients are within the States, right? Well, you're fortunate enough to have clients from all over. How are you able to achieve that? I mean, are you running social media ads or how does that work?
I've literally never ran ads ever since I started my own business. I possibly should or could, but I just love um, acquiring clients through word of mouth really or a referral better said because those people that when you speak to them the first time they've already bought in because their best friend told them how amazing their transformation is and how well it's all working, whereas if you pull in quote unquote cold leads or just someone who saw your
Mhm.
Facebook or
Mm.
Instagram
Mhm.
post once, um, they're a lot harder to sell, and b they don't know my philosophy. So sometimes have people reaching out to me. They're like, "Oh, Lisa, I followed you for 3 years on Instagram. I love everything you put out. I'm now ready to work with you." Like that's amazing. This person a knows a lot just in general because I try to give valuable content on my social media. B they know me really well, so they want to quote unquote please me. And of course, that's really important in my opinion too, that you have a coach that you respect or at least respect enough. It doesn't need to be someone who's like who you admire or whatever, but I think it needs to be someone who you want to do well for and you don't want to disappoint them. And so bringing those types of client on board has been so much fun. And honestly, so I do have a lot to thank, have the company that I initially worked for, Tailored Coaching Method is what they're called. I have them a lot to thank for because I got a lot of clients that way, and then they spread the word of mouth. And when I was ready to leave, they were like, "Oh, okay, I have a friend who wants to sign up. I hear that you're leaving this company. Can they sign up directly
Mm.
with you?" For example, one lady, she was a physiotherapist in Dubai, and she achieved a lot within a short amount of time, like unusual amount of weight loss, and like in a way where she looked amazing, just super defined and so on at the end. And of course, owning a big physio clinic
Mhm.
or health clinic with chiropractors, etc., people saw her every single day, and they were asking her about her transformation, and then like day after day after day, people would contact me and be like, "Oh, Tamara recommended you as a nutrition coach. Would I be able to work with you?" And so that's kind of how the wildfire spreads. And then, of course, if I travel certain places, I always tag the gym that I go to or so. And so you kind of start connecting with people no matter where you
That's
go.
awesome. How many clients are you typically working with at a given time?
So at the moment, or over the last few years, I have reduced my own client roster because I also have three ladies that work for me by now, more on a casual basis. Um, Initially, when I started or when I left the other company, at my highest times for like a year and a half, I had about 70
Wow.
clients. But I was literally not doing anything else other than work and train, and that was just like my time to make
Yeah,
money and put my head down. And I even realized that that's too much to also have a personal life, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go out and do my own business so that I could direct a little bit more how many clients I wanted to take on. And then for the next year or two, I had about between 30 and 40, which was a good number in order to also be able to create some social media content. And now that I also have my own podcast and a few um, other things that I do for the business, I've reduced my own client number to about 20. And I think that's something where I feel really comfortable at as a team leader, as a podcaster, and a nutrition coach, where I feel like I can give each client the attention that they
mhm.
deserve. And anytime it goes over that or so, I do try to direct them to the other coaches that
And
I
is
work with.
everybody that you work with pretty much like a weekly check-in?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I think most of the time they also get or do a little midweek just touch point where they're like, "Hey, everything's still going well," or "Can you help me with my weekend plans?" or something like that. But most of the time it's a weekly check-in. I think bi-week or every second week or once a month only works for maintenance clients or for people that are very
Mhm.
experienced. Like if someone's like, I've been, nutrition coaching with you for 3 years. I'm down to routine. I just really want to keep that point of contact with you as an accountability form. Can we do it once a month? I will do that with past clients, but not with
Mm,
anyone else
mm.
really.
Um, when you're working with your clients, is it all Gen Pop? Do you work with competitors at all?
It is mostly Gen Pop. I would say like 98% of the time it's Gen Pop. I have worked with a couple of or triathletes actually. I've worked with one jiu-jitsu fighter and a couple of people kind of in powerlifting and in the CrossFit space. I have never prepped anybody for a show or anything like that. It's just, yeah. I think also because I've never done
Yeah.
it myself, I don't think I would feel comfortable taking someone through peak week without another person guiding me
It's a whole nother
probably.
level when you're doing a competitor like that for stage,
Yeah,
for sure. Um,
I would say so. Even though like I'm very
mhm,
interested in it and I read a lot about it, I follow a lot of competitors because just I think I'm super curious about it myself. But I do think like to be able to relate to certain things like the
mm,
hunger or um yeah, like fears or things that go through your head in that last week or those last
mhm.
few weeks, I think it's important that you've done it yourself as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's a good friend of mine, runs a coaching business competitor coaching business, and yeah,
Oh, cool.
he's talked that a lot of what he does is more mental than actual nutrition,
Hmm.
because it's yeah,
I would say so.
it's very hard to especially when you're working with somebody that, um, in off season, you're in a calorie surplus because 'cause you're trying to grow the body, and then when you gotta be stage ready, you're cutting back so many calories that it's very hard to make that shift and not wanna keep eating.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that
Hmm.
it's a whole 'nother level.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes people they overestimate how much they want something. So
Mhm.
meaning someone might see a nice looking bikini competitor on Instagram and think like,
Yeah,
I want that. But they see they see them at the
yeah,
peak, they see them at the highlight, at the good moments. That competitor is not going to post when they feel super shitty and want
yep,
to give up or
mhm.
whatever. And so then people might get into a prep and realize like, oh, I did not expect that level of hunger. I did not expect that I need to give up my social eating 3 times per week. Because I mean those last, let's say 15 pounds or whatever, that is the
Yep.
biggest sacrifice. That early part of losing the weight is probably easiest. And my whole philosophy is a lot more about moderation and balance and teaching people that hey, you can incorporate a weekly date night with your partner,
Hmm.
you can go on a trip and travel. You don't need to feel guilty, you don't need to have these huge yo-yo moments and that all or nothing mindset. You can actually enjoy your life. And so I think that oftentimes it's hard for people to accept how much they have to give up if they want to reach that level
Yeah,
of
for
peak.
sure. I did one contest. I was a one and done kind of guy. I was like, I wanted the experience,
But
and
good
that
on
was it. I
you.
was done after that. I'm like, I'm never doing
Yes.
this again.
Well, but you did it. That I can imagine that was worth it for its
Yeah,
own sake.
yeah. And I'm the type of person where my body is like all or nothing. I either like I carry
Hmm.
a decent amount of fat or I can get really lean, right? But now for me
Okay,
to
yeah,
get
so
really
interesting.
lean, again, now that I'm older, my calories have to be much lower than a, a typical person. Because when I was
Of
prepping,
course.
I could remember my coach telling me, "Oh yeah, we prepped so and so, some other competitor, and he was taking in 1,000 grams of carbs during his peak week." Yeah, and I'm
Wow.
like, "What? How is that possible?" But everybody's so different in their metabolism,
Hmm.
on how they process carbs, how
Yes,
they process protein, all of that stuff, right? There's so much differentiation
absolutely.
between people. So some people can prep and go into peak week taking 3,500 calories, then some people need 1,500 calories, it just depends.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, but it sounds like an interesting experience
Oh, yeah, it
nonetheless.
was yeah, that's why I said I'm glad it was one and done. I competed more in powerlifting than I did one bodybuilding show,
Oh,
but I
cool.
would take powerlifting, aside from the injuries, I would take powerlifting over bodybuilding any day
Mm.
of the week.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Um, so are you taking new clients on now, or are you just kind of maintaining with what you have?
Yeah, no, we are taking on, like, especially with the other ladies helping out as well, taking on new clients basically at any point. I don't do any challenges or any group programs. I just don't quote unquote believe in them. I mean, I think they can be a gateway for some people, but as to your specific point, like, I think nutrition is too individualized. I think training programs can often work for a larger population, or at least they can be a base for someone to learn something, to start with something off, and then maybe become a little bit more specialized if needed. But nutrition, I do think, is very different. Like, you can certainly not give 10 people the same set of
Yeah.
macros or the same sort of even the same meal frequency. It's so individualized how someone enjoys their
Mhm.
food and digests their food the best. And exactly as we were saying, most of it comes down to the mental
Mhm.
aspect. And if you run a group program, I just don't think people open up as much. And so I mean, I could imagine that with your training clients, it's probably similar. Oftentimes they come to you for the training, but you turn into a little bit of a
Yeah.
therapist for them. Not to say that, like, I have absolutely no qualifications when it comes to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
therapy, but I mean, they just see you as a confident and open up about, okay, even if I ask like, why were you stress eating Thursday night? And then first they might be like, oh, it was a hard day. And you're like, okay, why was it a hard day? A lot of things
Mm.
going on. Do you want to share what was happening? Well, a lot going on with work and, a little bit of financial problems. Oh, okay. Do you want to tell me more about it? And then they open up and open up, and it turns out that they're having like a marital crisis while issues with their child, while needing to take care of the grandmother. And I see it as a privilege, really,
Mhm.
that people develop that sort of
Mhm.
trust in me to be able to want to share that with me. And then once we talk that through, it's like they open up and they actually accept that part of themselves. And it makes it so much easier to talk about strategies for
Mm.
stress eating or strategies for, when you are emotionally overloaded and you just want to compensate with food, as we all do, because that's our natural instinct. You are feeling stressed, so you want those carbs or that easy dopamine hit. But once you're aware of where that's even coming from, the desire, you forgive yourself for it. You learn how to insert a pause and how can I act differently than what my instincts would like me
Yeah.
to do. And that's how we see the long-term
Yeah.
success.
Damn emotions fucking light up all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. What are they doing with sabotaging
Yeah.
our goals?
Do you find that as well when you work with people that you have some clients that can ingest, high amount of calories and still lose weight, but then you've got some people you have to limit what they intake?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would say it's not as random as sometimes people think. Like, yes, I mean, absolutely what you were saying with genetics, et cetera, it does play a role. What I think it comes more down to is well, a activity level outside of the gym, as we were saying. Like some people, like on paper, to same people might say like I work out 3 to 4 times per week, but the one person super fidgety, always on their feet, like kind of with that high paced sort of person, they even talk
Mhm.
faster, and the other person does nothing all day long. They are going to have a very different metabolism. And then at the same time, if someone has dieted for the last 15 years on and off and on and off and on and off and off and off, and the other person has never, ever, ever, ever done a diet, they're going to have a much better metabolism than that first
Mhm.
person. And then, of course, also to the point of stress that we were mentioning earlier, even if two people have more or less the same tasks to do on their to-do list, one person might view all their stressors as something positive and they love their work and they don't mind working 14, 16 hours because it's their passion. And the other person sees their 12 hours and is just stressing about it, perceiving their stress only as something negative. That's also going to manifest in the body and how we're processing the food and
Mhm.
so on. So I've definitely seen big fluctuations, but more down to those those aspects, as well as just in general, like how lean are they
Mm.
already? Because if someone carries a lot of muscle mass at 140
Mhm.
pounds and someone else is 140 pounds, but they have 35% body fat, that is a
Yep.
huge difference when it comes to your
Yeah.
metabolic rate.
One thing that I've always found curious, and I would be curious your opinion on this as well, is w when you look at people that are, like, say, in the trades, right? And they are like a laborer that's 8 hours a day, constantly moving, shoveling dirt, moving bricks, whatever. I mean, they're constantly going, and generally speaking, I'm speaking general here, but you would assume that they're probably not ingesting enough calories for the amount of expenditure that they're doing throughout the day, every day of the week, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, yet their body fat is quite high. Why do you think that
Mhm.
is?
I do think that it's a lot of metabolic adaptation, or what we call metabolic adaptation. So essentially, the body learning to make do with little that it is given, because it knows like you're not taking that much care of me, so I just need to make do with what I've got. And on top of that, there might be another sort of hunger period coming up, so I'm better off storing anything that you're giving me, perhaps 1 or 2 days a week on a little bit more excess or so. I might store that as body fat, just as sort of a safety cushion. So I think when it comes to those points, it's if we compare it to our ancestors like way back, and they were going through periods of very little food, their bodies had to be smart to save some of
Mhm,
that in case to make it through the winter or whatever. And so that's probably what I would kind of transfer over to that person that's like actually has a very high calorie demand but not able to keep up with that. And yeah, I do see that often as well, like when people say I don't really eat that much, and like, yeah, maybe that's exactly your
mhm,
problem.
mhm,
Right, like you've been restricting for so long, and even though you're super super active, you're not giving your body or your metabolism the chance to work optimally,
mm.
really.
Yeah, that's so true. I love that. So when you work with somebody like that, what's usually the first change in their diet that you try and do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And most of the time, it comes down to like strategically, gradually increasing their calories to a maintenance level at first, so that we are actually getting to what their body is burning. It doesn't need to be more. And throughout that time, quite often, like if people don't maintain their weight, they often even lose their weight, even though they're, or lose body fat, even though we're increasing food, because exactly of what I was saying, like their body's learning how to ramp up again. It's kind of like when you have a laptop that's on standby
Mhm.
mode and everything is sort of
Mhm.
gray and no background processes are happening, and you plug it in, and after a while it's like, oh, I'm getting energy, I can
Yeah.
run this backup
Yeah.
process, I can run this, everything is becoming brighter, and that's what happens to your metabolism as well. So that's quite important, but it's also important to do that slowly and gradually. We can't just take someone who is regularly consuming 1,500 calories and the next day saying, oh, tomorrow I want you to eat to 2,500, because then that's a shock
Yes.
for the body as well, where it's like, what am I supposed to do with all this excess? I'm better off storing that. I don't know when the next hunger period
Yeah.
is coming. But the other important aspect to that is as well that we really need to make sure that we're actually consuming enough protein, because it's not just about increasing calories. It needs to be the right calories. So
Mhm.
if that person is not consuming enough protein or enough high quality foods and mostly processed foods or so, they're probably going to have poor digestion, and they're not making sure that they're supporting their lean body mass, their muscle mass. And if we're just doing that through, let's just say, just bread or
Mhm.
whatever, so that wouldn't be a good idea. But yeah, overall speaking, slowly, gradually bringing those calories up to a maintenance level. Then after a few, usually it does take a few months of staying at that maintenance level, where you're basically reassuring your body, your hormones, your metabolism, that, hey, I'm taking good care of you now. And then we can drop back into a calorie deficit, and their body will actually respond and will let go of that body fat
Yeah, that
happily.
I think that's so important what you're saying, because there's so many people that I talk to or that I've worked with, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm just cutting out carbs." No, that's the last thing that you should be doing, um, because what you end up doing
Yes.
is you put yourself in too much. So anyone listening to this, right? And Lisa, stop me if you think I'm incorrect, but if you cut your carbs like that, you drastically cut your calories so low, probably because most people are eating hypercaloric foods where there's a lot of fat
Mhm.
and carbs. So if you cut those out, you so drastically cut your calories that you get into what you were saying, almost like that the old adage, starvation mode. And then you're actually, the less carbs you ingest, the less water your body is holding on to as well. So yeah, you're going to get that initial weight loss, but the minute you eat another carb again, it's going to come right back, right? So anyone that I work with, I always
Absolutely.
say, before we start, I want you to send me your food log of what you typically eat in a day. And then I will
Mhm.
start their calories there where they're at today, but I shift their macros to, like what you were saying, higher protein, moderate carbs, healthy amount of fat, because there's so many hormone levels that are dependent on fat. And usually, I always tell them, run for this for the next 1 to 2 weeks. Let's see how your body responds. And usually, just that shift in macros, people will see a weight loss, and they're still ingesting the same amount of calories.
Oh, that's amazing. No, I love that approach. Absolutely. And I would say that on top of that, they probably also start
Mhm.
feeling better, like more satiated. I usually see less sugar
Mhm.
cravings and more energetic, etc., just because of that better distribution. So yeah, I love that
Yeah.
approach.
Lisa, thanks so much for coming on. Where can everyone find you if they wanna work with you, learn more about you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Bo. This has been an absolute pleasure, absolute joy speaking to you. So everyone can find me under Nutrition Coaching and Life. That's the name of the company. We have a website, but I'm most active on Instagram, really. I'm also on LinkedIn and YouTube, but yeah, Instagram is the main platform. And yeah, if you've enjoyed this conversation, listening to this, please send me a message letting me know that you heard me and
Mhm.
Bo chat, and I'd love to send you one of my freebies, or even just to connect in
Yeah,
that
please reach
way.
out to Lisa. I love what you're doing, and I love your lifestyle. I wish I could do the same thing, being all over the
Thank
world
you.
like you.
Thank
Lisa,
you so
thanks so much for
much.
coming on.